Welcome to this webinar on water arranged by SWESIF. My name is Edson Fonseca. I am one of the board members here at SWESIF. And as this is an open webinar, and for anyone that's unfamiliar with the association, we are the Swedish Sustainable Investment Forum. We recently celebrated our 20-year anniversary last year, and we now also count over 130 members, most of whom are asset managers and asset owners. The association itself works as a networking place and a meeting place for different stakeholders interested in sustainable investments. And as such, the association organizes a number of seminars, roundtable discussions, member lunches, and so on, where our members are able to meet and share insights and discuss their point of views together with different special guests from financial institutions, NGOs, academics, and so on, really to learn more about and contribute to the public debate around sustainable investments. So for today's sessions, we're going to be talking about water in sustainable investing. And for that, we have two very special guests with us, two experts within the field of water. Firstly, we have Dr. Therese Rudbeck, who is a senior policy analyst at WaterAid. She's an expert on corporate water stewardship and water as a financial risk. And she's also passionate about empowering corporations to have the biggest and the best possible impact with and for water as well. So super exciting to have you here with us, Therese. Alongside Therese, we also have Corinna Chan, who previously worked as the head of programs and impact at Philanthropy Asia Alliance under Temasek Trust. But now you are the CEO of Singapore International Foundation, which is a nonprofit dedicated to international peace building and development. And especially in the context of water, Singapore International Foundation has launched SEAPAW, which is a collaborative platform in Southeast Asia focusing on water-related climate adaptation. So very excited to also have you with us and hear a little bit more about the work that you're doing and the projects involved with SEAPAW as well. Before kicking off, just a quick reminder to everyone that this is a live webinar that is being recorded. Please remember to keep microphones muted and cameras off during the session. But with that said, also, if there should be any questions during the session, feel free to just put them into the chat. I will do my best to moderate some of these questions at the end, as we have reserved a few moments to have a little bit of a Q&A with our presenters today to just pick their brain on the content that is being presented today. So don't hold back on the questions. But to kick things off, handing it over to you, Therese, to get us started on the topic of water in investments. So over to you.
Thank you. And hi, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start by sharing some slides. If those come up in presentation mode. There we go. Hope that that's visible for everyone now. Can someone just say yes, that they're okay?
Yes.
Yes, perfect, thanks. So, hi everyone, my name is Therese Rudbeck. I am a senior policy analyst at WaterAid and also currently an affiliated researcher with Stockholm Resilience Center. And I've been invited here today to give you a kind of broad background to why we should think about water. Among all the issues that you as the financial community are required to think about these days, why should you care about water? And I'm here to drill down the point that water is actually the life force of the global economy. So today I'm gonna, if this works. There we go. So today I'm gonna walk you through why you should care about water, how water links to economic activities, how they link to financial services, and a bit of the pathway forward, what you as SWESIF members and others can do to take this on board. So why focus on water? We usually say that the Earth is a blue planet, but actually, is it? In fact, only about 3% of all the blue water that we see here is fresh water. And of that, only 3%, or 3%, 2/3, is captured in glaciers and polar ice. And around 0.5% of the Earth's water is actually available fresh water. So if you just account for that 0.5%, this is what the Earth would look like. And if you see those 3 dots there, that tiny, tiny, tiny dot, that is the available fresh water that we actually have. So yes, it is a blue planet, but the resources that we all depend on are actually quite scarce. And we're not treating our resources very well. Around the globe, we see that there's massive pollution of the water resources that we have. And due to climate change, we're also seeing a massive global water crisis unfolding with severe droughts and flooding in many parts of the world. Often happens simultaneously, but in different geographies. Looking at what global water scarcity looks like these days, we see that it's actually already severely widespread. So on this map showing or coming from the WWF water risk filter, you see the areas that are currently most affected by global water scarcity. And the redder the area, the more severe the risk. And this is an open data tool, so you can go in and have a play around with the water risk filter if you want. I would highly recommend it. It's a really, really useful starter point to understand global water risks worldwide. But obviously, as I said, it's not only water scarcity that's a problem. We're also seeing widespread water degradation due to pollution. And this is what that looks like, looking at water quality risks. Often when we talk about water, we tend to forget about that quality is equally important as the quantity of water, because even though there might be water available, it might not be of the best quality. And we see especially widespread water quality issues around Europe and North America. So a lot of the economic zones that we're interested in have severe quality issues. But above all, water is also a human crisis. And at WaterAid, this is something that we work with every day. And even as someone, or maybe especially as someone working with this every day, it's hard to kind of actually take in how bad this is. And it's hard to become indifferent, or it's easy to become indifferent to all these numbers because they are so obscene, really. But actually, about 3.6 billion people still lack access to safely managed sanitation services. About 2.3 billion people lack access to basic hygiene practices. That would be hand washing with soap. And that has severe effects on people's health. And then astoundingly, about 4.4 billion people still lack access to safely managed drinking water services. And that's more than double than previously estimated. You may have heard numbers of around 2 billion before, but just a few weeks ago, there were new reports making new estimates, estimating that these have been massively underestimated previously. And we're actually looking at over 4 billion people who do not have access to safe drinking water, which is really infringing on basic human rights. Also, we talk about climate a lot. And actually, when we talk about climate change, it's impossible to do that without also talking about water, because water is the primary medium through which climate change influences the Earth's ecosystem. Therefore, adaptation to climate change is mainly about improving water management and absolutely fundamentally improved wash services, so water sanitation and hygiene services, is a cornerstone of building climate resilience. And that is because if we increase and improve water storage, that provides buffers in times of water scarcity. We look at infrastructure, making climate resilient infrastructure that is adapted to climate change is critical so that they can continue to deliver even in times of water stress or flooding. And want to be clear here, it's not like we can build toilets that are cyclone resistant. That's not what I'm saying, but we can adapt our infrastructure to be more resilient than what it currently is. And also, if we do ensure that people have access to wash services, they are more resilient when the crisis hit, and it's less likely to have compounded effects in terms of disease burdens. Water is actually also very critical to climate mitigation. This is something that hasn't been talked about a lot before, but new research here published a few years ago by a number of organizations, including CV, UNDP, GIZ, Potsdam Institute for Climate Action Research, and the Stockholm Resilience Center, did an amazing job in terms of unpacking how climate mitigation is actually completely dependent upon freshwater resources. So most of the mitigation measures that we are looking to deliver, such as clean energy, are actually intrinsically dependent on available freshwater. We also see that a lot of the climate mitigation measures that we try to implement actually have a negative impact on freshwater resources. So there's a trade-off there that we have to be aware of. We're also looking at the huge benefits that improving water sanitation management can have in terms of actually reducing greenhouse gas emissions, because a lot of the sanitation that we see around the world, piping and etc., is actually emitting a lot of methane. So if we improve those services, we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And we also see that nature-based solutions can deliver multiple benefits. So not only climate mitigation measures, but also have improved water benefits. So looking at why all of this matters to you, and not just as people, but also in your jobs, water is also intrinsically linked to economic activities. So I'm going to try and wake you up a little bit here and try to have some audience engagement and ask you, you probably had a cup of coffee sometime today, maybe this morning. How many liters of water do you think went into producing 1 cup of coffee? And you can put your answers in the chat. And don't be shy.
So there's a few different widespreading kind of alternatives that people are putting into the chat. It ranges really everything from 500 milliliters up to 15 liters and so on. So I think there's a number of them that's actually put in 4 liters, 5 liters, 20 liters. Someone actually went up to 100 liters.
Yeah.
Someone said 3,000 liters. So.
Well, somewhere in between there. The one who said 100 is fairly close. It's around 130 for 1 cup of coffee. What do you think it takes to make a hamburger? I can give you a hint that it's more.
Do we have a number of them around 1,000 liters?
Mm-hmm.
Someone was up at 5,000, 2,000.
Yeah, the one around 2,000 is a pretty good guess. It's around 2,500 liters. What about a pair of jeans?
Around 6,000, 5,000. A few and 5,000 here.
Getting pretty close, but it's actually more. It's around 8,000 to 12,000. It depends a little bit on whether or not the cotton is rain-fed or irrigated, but where it's grown, but it's roughly 10,000. And now if you think about all of that, does anyone have a guess how much Coca-Cola company, and not the amount of water that goes into a can, but the amount of water that Coca-Cola company uses worldwide during a year? Anyone want to have a guess?
I think people are a bit
hesitant on that.
Yeah.
Yes, I can say it's a lot of zeros. It's roughly 30 trillion liters. And I should say these numbers are old. This figure is from 2010, and I don't know by how much, but I can guarantee it's gone up since then. And if you, like me, don't really grasp how many zeros that is and how much water that actually is, it's roughly the same amount of water as 2 billion people need for their daily needs, or the same amount of water that Sweden, Norway, and Denmark combined uses as countries. But I should also say that less than 1% of that is actually going into the can. the vast majority of that is used in their supply chain, as in the agricultural supply chain that takes to grow the sugar, etc. But a lot of leaders, and that's just Coca-Cola Company, which by no means is the only company using water. So basically, what I'm trying to drill down here is that water is needed to make everything that we use, whatever it is, the clothes that we wear, the food that we eat, the technology that we use, everything has a vast amount of water going into it, predominantly in the supply chain. So here, for example, you see a typical supply chain or value chain for a textile, an apparel, with fiber production, fiber processing, distribution, warehousing, all up until the consumer. And at pretty much all steps of the way, we see a vast water intensity, but also water pollution. So you cannot make any type of clothing without water. Similar to mining and the mining sector, where a lot amount of water goes into the building the mine, but especially the processing of ores. And I should highlight that this is, of course, the bottom of the supply chain of all of our technology, which we depend upon for our green transition, but also for all of our technology, such as computers, phones, etc. So a lot of water is required here. And we are seeing how the global water crisis that we're seeing is actually starting to impact these companies in a negative way. So, for example, in 2011, the textile or clothing company Gap had to cut its projected profits by about 22% due to a drought in 2011. And that was because of the cotton production being completely wiped out due to droughts. In the same year, floods in Thailand had massive effects on Intel. They had to drop sales by about 1.5 billion. Again, same year. So we often see droughts and flooding happening at the same time, but in different locations. And in this case, having vast, widespread economic effects. More recently, you may have also seen the controversy around Tesla's first factory in Germany. That was actually delayed due to drought. There wasn't enough water to support the factory. And if I am informed, I think it is up and running, but it is causing massive controversy in the local community because the factory is competing with quite scarce water resources with the community. So it is heavily criticized, causing a massive reputational risk to Tesla. So what do companies do? I mean, we are seeing actual tangible economic effects of water scarcity on companies. So we are seeing a lot of companies making claims such as these. That, for example, Google are saying that they're going to replenish 120% of the water that they consume. PepsiCo announces that they're going to be net water positive. Coke claims that for every drop we use, we're going to give one back. And Facebook, nowadays Meta, are claiming that they're going to restore more water than they consume by 2030. And these are all, really great claims. But if you see claims like this, I would recommend some caution, because specifically within what scope are those commitments made? So operations or value chains. So if you remember how much water Coke used, when they claim that they're going to give one drop back for every drop that they use, that is actually only accounting for the water that they use within their operations and not their supply chain. And as we saw, the vast amount of water that they use is actually in the supply chain and not in their operations. A lot of companies also make specific geographical bounds around these claims. So PepsiCo, for example, promised to replenish in high-risk areas, not the entire value chain. We also see a lot of companies making water efficiency goals, but often they are per product, but their absolute production is still going up, meaning that their water use is still going up, even though it's less per product. And most critically, it's really, really detrimental to mix up that water footprint is the same as a carbon footprint. For carbon, we can say that a ton emitted carbon somewhere is the same amount of carbon emitted elsewhere because it's all going up in the same atmosphere. But if you extract a liter of water somewhere, putting that water back is not necessarily the same if you put it back somewhere else, because it needs to go into the same system. It's localized in a different way. It's also a cycle, meaning that even if you put it back in the same place, if you put it back at a different time, it might be wet period rather than a drought period, and it might not have the same effect. So we need to be a lot more cautious when it comes to these types of claims, when it comes to water, than when it comes to carbon. So how does all of this link to financial services then? As you know, you're all connected to these economic activities as an investor, lender, insurer, which means by extension, you are exposed to the same risks and impacts that the companies are faced with by, for example, the company default in repaying back, a loss of investment and assets becoming stranded, a reduced return, as we saw, companies having to cut profits, or like Tesla, facing massive reputational risks right now because of their water impact in the local community. So how can you as SWSIF member contribute and actually have a positive impact? I would strongly urge you to support improved disclosure. So companies are still quite, well, there's room for improvement in terms of disclosure when it comes to water. So ask them to disclose, for example, via CDP. Because at the moment, even if you would want to take action, there are substantial data gaps at the moment, and reporting standards are quite inconsistent when it comes to water. There's also a severe lack of data when you look at supply chains. And when you look at the indicators they're often quite crude and not rich enough to actually understand the water issues at a local context. But I will say that there is currently really exciting opportunities to drive more transparency that we see with CSRD and CSDDD. Water and sanitation is explicitly mentioned in CSRD, and the prohibition to restrict workers' access to adequate water and sanitation in the workplace is explicitly mentioned in CSDDD. Critically, there are also implicit links, such as things around health and safety, gender equality in CSRD, and prohibition to restrict access to adequate housing in CSDDD. But I will say disclosure requirements on water and wash-related topics are quite demanding. They depend on a lot of prior knowledge and expertise around water issues because a lot of the links are implicit rather than implicit. So you need to understand how water links to, for example, health and safety or gender equality or climate to actually make those links. So the quality of the disclosure will very much depend on the quality of the materiality assessment. So I will urge you to have discussions with your companies around this. But critically, I really urge you to actually try to map the water risks and impacts in your own portfolio and have dialogues and put pressure on the companies that are identified as high risk, high impact. And if you want to have a stab at this, there is a report actually released by SWSIF a few years ago together with CEV and CDP on how you can start doing this. And with that, I'm going to sum up with some key messages. So critically, I really want you to understand that water is a material issue. It is underpinning most economic activities. So no water, no business, and essentially no financial return. Water is also intrinsically linked with all other ESG issues that you are asked to care about, not just climate, but also biodiversity, food security, health, gender, that I haven't really touched upon here. Critically, water is localized and cannot be addressed with one-size-fits-all approach. It's not like carbon. I know it's really appealing to want a net zero target for water because it's easy and quantifiable, but we need to recognize and embrace that water is more localized and requires a more diversified approach. But there's also strength in that, and building resilience will be critical. And finally, I really do want to urge the financial services sector has a vital role to play to achieve water security. Financial flows need to support sustainable water management for all of us. With that, I'm going to hand over to next speaker.
Thank you, Therese. super interesting to hear a little bit more about your insights around that, and also some practical and kind of tangible examples as well. Moving over to Corinna. Corinna, you'll talk a little bit more about some of the work through CPAW and some of the work that has been conducted, especially in the context of water, and more specifically about the necessity to look at the world through a water lens. So please go ahead.
Thank you, everybody. Good day. Corinna, thank you for having us today here. I think I will start off with showing just a very short video before I go into my other presentation slides.
Water. It sustains us. But today, water is also at the heart of our planet's greatest challenges. Fiercer storms, extreme floods, severe droughts. Yet, in the face of these challenges, we find hope in our ability to adapt and to take action together. This is the mission of CPAW, the Southeast Asia Partnership for Adaptation Through Water. Led by the Singapore International Foundation in collaboration with the World Economic Forum, this movement is a call to action for change.
CPAW will bring together and convene stakeholder groups, those who have got the knowledge, the solutions, and those who have got the financing capabilities to come together to co-curate and co-develop workable solutions to address real issues on the ground.
Enabling collaborative solutions tailored to our region's unique water-related challenges.
Here in Southeast Asia, we are the most vulnerable. We can see this happening in all our major cities. Flooding, droughts, wildfire, climate has already changed. And therefore, human civilization has no choice but to adapt.
CPAW allows us to elevate this conversation to the point where we can involve decision makers that have the power to try new things.
To advance water adaptation in agriculture, urban planning, and nature conservation. To build climate resilience in Southeast Asia. To change the course for a more equitable and sustainable water future. A future where water once again flows with promise and possibility.
CPAW is seeing adaptation and water as a solution space. Bringing those two together can show the world that what needs to be done also can be done.
Join us as we turn the tide. CPAW. Water finds a way, and so will we.
So once again, thank you for having us. I think Therese has touched a lot on why water, but just want to highlight a bit that from CPAW, I think we are taking it from a climate adaptation angle. So we know that a lot of efforts so far, including private sector efforts, governments, and multilateral development banks, the focus have been on climate mitigation thus far, with reforestation, afforestation, renewable energy. But I think what we need is a focus on adaptation as well. So as you can see, 5%, only 5% of climate financing today is directed towards adaptation, which represents a financing gap of over 200 billion annually. This is actually a study done by World Economic Forum. They survey businesses and governments on what they feel and think about risks related to climate adaptation. So you can see 2 years from now, extreme weather events related to climate change is ranked high. And 10 years from now, you can see there are many more risks related to climate adaptation, highlighted by both businesses and governments. And yet, businesses face challenges in working on adaptation. So this is a survey that's conducted on 50 companies on Forbes list. And there are several reasons cited by businesses on why they have not been looking at adaptation. Despite knowing the challenges, despite knowing the solutions, not many have embarked on climate adaptation work thus far. So we can see that water is both a cause and causality of climate crisis. I won't delve much into this, but it is what it is. The reason why we look at water in relation to climate adaptation is 90% of adaptation efforts relates to water. And why water? I don't need to repeat what Therese said, but just that water actually underpins all of the SDGs. So CPAW, the Southeast Asia Partnership for Adaptation Through Water, is an effort to bring together leaders from various industries, those with solutions, the academic institutions, those with the solutions for some of the water challenges, those with financing capabilities, and those who have got the needs. So the intent of CPAW is to convene a group of leaders to share knowledge, to share solutions, and to come together to catalyze collaborations and look at projects and needs on the ground. The levers of change are really bridging the adaptation, resilience, and water strategies. We also hope to inform policies with the expertise that we bring together, and more importantly, unlocking business potential so that adaptation work is not viewed as a cost center, but actually an investment opportunity. So these are the areas of focus for CPAW. Water resource management, a lot of these have got to do with industry. So Therese have highlighted the F&B industry, textile industry, data centers, semiconductors, food security, anything from agriculture to soil contamination, asset protection, sustainable water access. This is really looking at providing clean water because rural communities have been impacted by contamination at the water source, as well as nature-based and circular solutions. So for some of these areas of focus, we are already embarking and working on projects with members of CPAW. So I'll just highlight a few. One is sustainable agriculture. So in Southeast Asia, especially, we are a huge consumer and huge producer of rice. So what we are hoping to do is, with the solution that we have in growing rice in a more sustainable manner in terms of reducing water usage, in terms of reducing methane emission, in terms of having higher productivity and growing climate resilient rice varieties, as well as improve soil management that will increase the yield of rice. I think early on, Therese spoke about the textile industry. So apart from solutions for rice, we also have solutions that mediate soil, which means that toxic water from the textile industry that is discharged into soil will contaminate actually grains that grow on this contaminated soil. So a related solution that we have is also growing rice on soil that makes the rice grain safe to eat. That means the toxic from the soil goes to the stem and the leaf, leaving the grain safe for consumption. The next one is on sustainable aquaculture. Therese also mentioned there is really very little fresh water available. So aquaculture, apart from trying to free up space, fresh water, it's also a very sustainable way of farming, and we try to bring these solutions to urban landscape. And what this also does is also to free up fresh water, because this is able to farm fish that can tolerate slightly brackish water. So you free up fresh water in that sense. There are other solutions that relate to clean water. There are many solutions out there, but I think for us, we also want to focus on the rural communities where not all solutions are suitable for rural communities. So what we do is we pilot solutions on a small scale. We bring to rural communities water and systems that is cost efficient, as well as requiring a low maintenance, because I think maintenance is always a challenge when we come to rural communities. Next, clean water also in crisis. When a crisis, weather crisis hits, what they need is fast, low cost, lightweight solutions to providing clean water, as well as solutions that we have in terms of building reef resilience against climate change. So the whole thing about sea level rise, coastal resilience, especially for small island states. These are some of the solutions and projects we hope to work with corporates and investors, foundations and philanthropists in country. So CPOL is about bringing together members, coming together to co-curate and co-develop solution, because we understand that for every challenge, not one single party will have all the solutions, because many times it's not only the stakeholders who have got solutions, but it's also taking a policy lens. So no point putting in a solution where the policies in a country do not support sustainable scaling of a solution. So this is the CPOL membership structure. Intent is really bringing together stakeholders to co-curate and co-develop projects with sustainable financing and in mind. And CPOL is actually supported by the Singapore International Foundation and World Economic Forum, and is chaired by Professor Khoo Teng Chai. Next slide. So I think many people in the water space in the industry will know Prof. Khoo, who has actually he headed the Singapore Water Agency before, and he continues to work on a lot of water projects in Southeast Asia. So this is a call for investors, financial institutions to join us to actually champion what is needed in terms of climate adaptation through water. To give a sense of timeline, CPOL started our first consultative dialogue session in April this year. And we are very happy to have, Jenny, who joined us at our CPOL dialogue in April. It was formally launched in June this year. So now is the phase that we actually work with members and stakeholders to develop projects. And we're going to have a first convening of our members in November. And looking ahead, one of the important items that we will be working on is also to work with the GCEW, the Global Commission for the Economics of Water, on their recommendations that will come out of their report in the second half of this year. A lot will have to do with policies and governance of water, including the right pricing and subsidies for water. So I'd just like to end off with this quote from Singapore's president, Mr. Tharman. He launched CPOL. President Tharman is also the patron of SIF. And I think what he said here is really pertinent, that the solutions for water are all out there. But I think it's the effort to bring together stakeholders for bolder partnerships to spur investment in new technologies and economically viable solutions that we would like to focus on for CPOL. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Corinna. Super interesting to hear about the work that is being done through the initiative. And as you say, I mean, a lot of focus has been on more so adaptation, to mitigation rather than adaptation. So it's super interesting to kind of see what's happening within the fields. I mean, welcoming back as well, Therese, for a little bit of a Q&A, and for the audience as well, feel free to, pop in any questions that you might have, and we'll get to those in due course as well. But just to start off the Q&A itself, I mean, perhaps starting with you, Therese. I mean, last week, Stockholm hosted World Water Week, and I'm sure you were very busy kind of following everything that was going on during kind of the conferences throughout the days. But for those of us really who didn't attend, I mean, is there any specific key takeaways that you would mention from the weekend? Was there perhaps anything that came as a surprise or was perhaps encouraging that you encountered during the conference?
No, okay. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that. So yes, last week was Stockholm Water Week. As you said, really busy week. So it is a really special event because it's it's the biggest annual water-focused conference. And it's always very vibrant and bringing together loads of different people. And nowadays it's also hybrid, so you can tune in online, which is opening up for a wider audience. I'd say in terms of a positive takeaway from my perspective is that we see more and more companies engaging in this. And I would say not only more companies, but diverse range of companies. Whereas a decade ago, the companies that you would see at these types of events would be the multinational food and beverage companies. But nowadays you see smaller companies and from different sectors. The tech industry, as Corina mentioned, with the data centers is really getting on this as well, which is encouraging to see. In terms of things I would like to see more of, Corina mentioned that part of CPAW's mandate is to bring together public as well as private sector. And I think that is still kind of an issue. There are public sector representatives at World Water Week, but they tend to be in different rooms as the companies. And to solve these things, we need to have them in the same room. I would also say that the financial community is not there. If you were there and there online, great, but presence in the room is quite sparse. So I think there's a real opportunity to engage further in these discussions for the financial sector.
Absolutely. I think that as many of kind of these sustainability topics, it's really essential and crucial that there's a lot of collaboration, engagement, and conversation about these things. For Corina, perhaps, I mean, you did mention and kind of spoke quite a bit about the general lack of focus on water when it comes to adaptation. And I mean, you're sitting in Asia, of course, but how do you think about the prevalence of the issue at a more kind of global level? Do you think perhaps also the adaptation bit as well will receive perhaps a higher focus going forward?
No, so I think the situation right now and the study that we have with our partner in CPAW shows that at the global level, I think challenges remain. The focus is still on mitigation. So if you look at the discussions coming off COP, coming off a lot of climate events, it's still about mitigation. It's still about afforestation, reforestation. Of course, energy is a big issue, a big discussion topic. So they managed to get something with the private sector going on renewable energy. You know, there's a demonstration piece in Philippines. So we hope that there will be more focus on adaptation. And really it's for the private sector to think of it as an opportunity for innovation, for investment. And it's really not a cost center. Because, I mean, I can set an example. So we speak to insurers. So insurance companies come in and they have come to understand that insurance is not about funding resilience, because it is really about factoring the premium discounts when people start to build resilient infrastructure. So that's an example of how we see that it's really not a cost center, it's a business opportunity, and it's really how you innovate it. Yeah.
And you were also talking about how, you know, stakeholders should work together for the greater good, right? So in the context of water and climate adaptation here, what do you do to, you know, facilitate financing? Do you think that blended finance has a role to play within this?
Yeah, certainly. So CPAW members, I mean, it's varied. We have people who have got really the knowledge, and we have a lot of solution providers, people who have got the technology and solutions. And we have another group who are the financial institutions. But more so than that, they are also family philanthropies and foundations. And water issues and solutions for water in Southeast Asia, because geography is varied, political situation and is varied. So for each solution and project we try to bring in country, the philanthropic funding is very important, because the feasibility study and the proof of concept, the pilot projects are important to show that a particular solution works. And the hope is, if it works, then it has to be scaled. The government can scale it, but some of these solutions lend itself to commercially viable projects and investments. So if something is proven to work, the opportunities are there. And that's where we hope that, with blended financing, with even upfront funder type of mix, we will be able to have more people invest and look at adaptation work in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the scale is a critical point as well to very much kind of make these things work. We do have a few questions coming into the chat as well, so I'm going to try to address some of these as well. So Robert Lindblom to Therese asked specifically, considering EU regulations such as FSFDR and the principal adverse indicators, what is your view on the risk of blue washing? Where blue funds really kind of invest in industries that contribute to water emissions instead of, in water treatment, for example.
It's a tough question. Need to think about that for a second. Yeah.
I think that thing that you were mentioning before as well was really kind of the importance of disclosures as well. And of course, what SFDR is doing, and also the principal adverse impact indicators that a lot of asset managers in particular need to report on. It's perhaps addressing that first bit on disclosure from their end as well. But at the end of the day, it's also the disclosure from the companies. But in the case of really of blue washing as well, if there's any recent thing that you've kind of seen within that space. And
yeah, I think there's I'm going to backtrack a bit, because the quality of disclosure is going to be so dependent on the quality of the materiality assessment, and the materiality assessment will require prior knowledge about the topics. And this is I think it's impossible for anyone to be a specialist in all the ESG related topics. Like, you can't, because it takes years to become a specialist in a minor part of one of the ESG topics. So I think there is a real risk of not quite understanding the links that you should be making. So even with the best of intentions of these regulations, it's really easy to miss. And in terms of diverting investments to places that have a negative impact, I think there is a real risk of that, because often companies might be aware of the risks, but not necessarily the negative impacts that they have. And it might not just be that funds flow into things that contribute to pollution, but it might be contributing to companies that aren't even aware of that they have a negative impact on water resources.
Yeah. So one of the things he was also mentioning here was, for example, that urban wastewater treatment plants often report the majority of emissions from industries, which kind of makes them perhaps less attractive, while industries kind of creating the emissions become more attractive because they're perhaps not really reporting to the same extent. And, I guess the question from him was also, how can we ensure that investment decisions are based on the transparency and comprehensive assessment on water emissions, which is kind of what you were kind of addressing there as well.
Yeah, and I think part of that will be to get a more comprehensive disclosure, not just of operations, but of supply chains, to understand, even if a company itself is considered green, they might rely on supply chain or industries further down the line that really aren't. So if we're forcing disclosure, which CSRD and CSDDD is actually doing now, to actually account for not just operations, but supply chain, and identifying negative impacts throughout the whole value chain, I think that can really drive positive change if like the right level of materiality assessment, double materiality assessment is conducted.
And another question here, and I mean for both of you to answer really from Dag from Systenax. Should water risk be elevated to the same level as climate risk and nature risk on a standalone basis?
Yes. I should say. I mean, I think it's,
Yeah.
I mean, I know I've been in so many sessions where all of us from our different community is saying that our particular topic is underpinning all the other SDGs. But I mean, I think they are, I'm not going to say that that one is more important than the other. I think it's impossible to talk about nature or climate or water without talking about the other two, because it's so interrelated. So I think we need to give them equal weight and understand the interlinkages.
And I would just like
Absolutely.
to add to that I think water is often taken for granted. I mean, yeah, people just assume that there will always be water and they will just use water. And it doesn't help that, policies in some countries do not price water correctly. And for countries that provide water subsidies, I mean, these are all the policy issues that need to be addressed when we talk about water, and for water risk to be elevated to the same level as climate risk.
Absolutely. And I mean, another question here really, and I mean, kind of touching on some of the regulations coming in, how do you see companies understanding and starting to define water risk as material risk? I mean, is it really the role that we need to kind of enforce this through regulations such as CSRD, or are there other ways to kind of trigger this kind of awareness and really kind of this focus around water as well?
I think regulation is actually key. I mean, there are a lot of voluntary standards out there, but as one of people at World Water Week said, regulatory always trumps voluntary. And I think there is a lot of good voluntary disclosure out there, but because it is voluntary, it's only gonna capture those that are already informed and already have vested interest in this. I think with regulation, you will capture a much broader audience. I think that really is key. I think it's also critical to kind of focus not just on water quantity issues, but water quality issues, and like get away from the counting drops, but understand like the wider water issues. So yes, I'm very excited about the upcoming regulation. I think it's going to be challenging. I'm not saying they're perfect, but I think it is a step in a really promising direction.
No, absolutely. And I think that, I mean, everything has a role to play, right? I mean, it's both the regulation, but it's also kind of talking about it. It's about being in the room. It's about the initiatives as well. I mean, Corinna, that you guys are involved in and kind of setting the foundations really on how to see how can we build these things out and how can we create different solutions around this as well. So I think that all of these different things really plays a piece to that puzzle, for it to also, for the work itself to kind of continue.
Would also say that with the voluntary standards, CDP, for example, I see Torun is on the line. Great. But I mean, latest data from CDP show a real discrepancy, especially when you look at water sanitation and hygiene targets. I mean, the number of organizations, companies that set targets and follow up on this is like in the tens. Around, they have several thousand companies disclosing, and it's like just a few percent looking at things like this. So I think there is a real opportunity for regulation to drive that number up.
Yeah. There's also a question here. So, I mean, and it was also mentioned previously, I mean, we cannot all be specialists in all kind of ESG aspects, but for any kind of non-specialists, to be able to assess the water risk for single companies, where would be the best place to start?
Or I'm going to assume that that's for me, but please jump in, Corinna.
It's definitely for you.
So, I mean, I would say if it's a well-known brand, have a dialogue with the company. If you want to do the research yourself, I mean, if it's any type of agricultural company or a mining company or a tech company or chemical company, I'm going to assume, you can assume that there are substantial water risks in their operations. Textiles as well, counting that as agriculture because of the cotton. I think if you want, as an investor, you can have a look at Ceres. It's an American organization. They have a Ceres Water Toolkit, which is a good step-by-step guide. You can also have a look at the CDP data to understand an individual company. And companies should also disclose a fair amount on their own sustainability reports. At least that should give you a hint if this is on the radar. But if you want to understand global water issues too, I would go to WWF Water Risk Filter as well, if you know where they have operations, and have a play around with the maps and see where the red hotspots are. They also have a biodiversity risk filter that you can play around with too.
Great. Thank you a lot for that. And I think a question for both of you guys. I mean, if there was one thing that you could kind of change to help facilitate the work on more sustainable water management, what would it be? Perhaps starting with you, Corinna.
I think it would be the mindset.
More focus on it.
I mean,
Not to take
because
water for
I
granted.
think there is enough knowledge coming out of it. There is enough solutions, but why aren't people moving to look at water issues? So it's back to, I think people just take it for granted, even though it underpins all of the SDGs, because it does affect, gender, women issues as well. So I think a mindset change is important. To view it as something that they need to work on and not take it for granted.
I would 100% agree with that. I would maybe also add shifting from a risk lens to an impact lens, and not just looking from a financial perspective on the risks facing the operations, but also the impact that those operations have. Because for a long time, we've been just focusing on the risks without necessarily mentioning that many of those risks are there because of prior economic activities. And I think understanding those links will be critical moving forward.
Great. I guess one last thing, perhaps. I know that we're running up on time here, but for anyone kind of dialing in and wanting to kind of know more about water, or kind of also specifically within the field of water adaptation, where do they read perhaps more? Where are they able to kind of read into? I'm sure there's a lot of material out there, but where do you kind of look to kind of get into more information, if you have anything specific that you would want to highlight?
I think we can certainly share the presentations. And responding to the chat here. And I think within the deck, you know how to contact us.
Yeah, I can echo that. I'm also happy to share my presentation. In terms of where to look, I recognize that it is challenging because water is such a broad topic. So, when you want to look into water, you can go in so many different directions. I will say that CV, Stockholm International Water Institute, has a lot of good information and publications if you want to read up on water issues more broadly. So I would maybe start there.
All right.
A related report will be the report that's coming out of the Global Commission of the Economics of Water. And that is slated for, I think, the fourth quarter of this year. I think in it, there will be a lot of governance and economics related to water, which, the financial community might be interested in. So yes, fourth quarter of this year.
Perfect. Something to look forward to. All right. We're coming up to time. Thank you very much, Corinna and Therese, for taking the time and joining us today and talking a little bit more about your expertise and the insights that you guys have. It's been super interesting to listen into and just digest. So thank you very much. And thank you to the audience members as well, who's been listening in and actively participating in the chat as well. Super excited to see that everyone has been quite interactive and excited to also kind of interact. So with that said, thank you for that, and we hope to see you on the next seminar or webinar that we're hosting. Thank you.